They say silence is golden, but sometimes it is not peace. Sometimes it is the quiet, indrawn breath before a storm that will tear a world apart. It is the stillness that falls when a heart doesn't just break, but shatters into a million pieces of cold, hard glass. And it is the profound calm that follows when a person begins to meticulously pick up those shards, not to heal, but to forge them into a weapon. This was the silence that descended upon Ilara's life, in the heart of the beautiful home she had designed, on the evening she was planning her husband's surprise birthday party. The house was a testament to her vision, a masterpiece of glass and light known as Aura Designs, the firm she had built from a simple dream into an architectural empire. Her husband, Julian, was the charismatic face of that empire, the man whose charm could captivate any client. And her sister, Chloe, was her shadow, her confidant, the ever-present assistant who knew Ilara's every secret. To the outside world, they were a portrait of success, a family bound by love and ambition. Ilara believed it too. She believed in the warmth of Julian's smile and the loyalty in her sister's eyes. She was looking for an old photograph on his laptop, a picture from their first vacation to surprise him with. That's when she saw it, a folder, tucked away, innocuously named Admin. Curiosity, a harmless little spark, made her click. What she found was not an old photograph, but a digital abyss that swallowed her whole. It started with the emails, messages overflowing with a sickening intimacy between Julian and Chloe. They were filled with secret names, shared jokes at her expense, and plans for a future that did not include her. Then came the images, snapshots of stolen weekends and secret embraces in places Ilara recognized, places she had once found happiness. The pain was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. But she kept digging, driven by a horrifying need to know the full extent of the nightmare. And then she found the subfolder. It was labeled Project Phoenix. It wasn't a love nest, but a war room, spreadsheets, legal documents, and a step-by-step strategy to systematically dismantle her control over Aura Designs. They were using her trust as a weapon, exploiting legal clauses in contracts she'd signed without a second thought, planning to declare her mentally unfit from overwork, and seizing control of the board. They weren't just stealing her husband and her sister, they were stealing her life's work. The final document she opened was a chat log. Chloe's words burned into her memory. He'll be the perfect heir for the new Aura Designs. Julian's son. A baby. They were building a new family on the ruins of hers. In that moment, something inside Ilara shifted. The searing pain did not erupt into screams or tears. It crystallized. It turned into something cold, something heavy, something terrifyingly clear. The woman who had loved Julian with every fiber of her being, the sister who had protected Chloe her entire life, simply ceased to exist. She closed the laptop, her movements steady and precise. The warmth in her veins had been replaced by ice. As she walked out of the study and back into the soft lighting of her perfect home, the mask of a loving wife slipped perfectly back into place. The storm had not broken. It had simply gone quiet, gathering a strength that Julian and Chloe could never have imagined. Their life was lived inside a work of art, a house nestled in the green hills of Northern California that Ilara herself had designed. It was called the Crestwood House, a name that appeared in architectural magazines and design blogs across the world. It was a structure of soaring glass walls, warm redwood, and clean, minimalist lines that seemed to float above the landscape. Every room was a conversation between light and shadow, every piece of furniture a statement of purpose and beauty. To guests, it was breathtaking. To Ilara, it was a home, but it was also her portfolio, her soul rendered in steel and stone. She was the heart of this world, its silent, beating center. Ilara had not been born into this life of quiet luxury. She was the daughter of a contractor and a school teacher, a girl who preferred graph paper to dolls and spent her childhood sketching floor plans in the margins of her notebooks. She possessed a rare kind of genius, the ability to see not just buildings, but the lives that would unfold within them. She built Aura Designs on a foundation of sleepless nights, relentless perfectionism, and a loan she secured by charming a banker with a cardboard model and a vision that was utterly undeniable. She wasn't just the founder, she was the source, Every award-winning concept, every revolutionary design that made their clients' jaws drop, originated in the quiet sanctuary of her mind. She was soft-spoken, more comfortable with a blueprint than with a room full of people, and she carried her success with an unassuming grace that many mistook for fragility. Julian was the man who taught her creation how to speak to the world. When they met, he was a real estate agent with a dazzling smile and an ambition that burned as brightly as her own creativity. He saw the genius in her, but he also saw an opportunity. He became her partner, first in business, then in life. Julian was the thunder to her lightning. Where Alara was reserved, Julian was effusive. He could walk into a room of strangers and leave with a dozen new friends and 3 potential clients. He was the face of Aura Designs, the master of the pitch, the closer of deals. In the early days, their partnership was perfect. She was the architect, he was the ambassador. He would take her complex, brilliant ideas and translate them into a language that investors and clients could understand and fall in love with. He celebrated her, lionized her, called her his muse. But over the years, a subtle shift occurred, a slow, creeping erosion of truth. He began to use the word we when talking about her designs. We decided on a cantilevered roof, he'd say in meetings, when in fact, he had argued against it until Alara had proven its structural integrity. Then, we slowly became I. At cocktail parties, he would recount the story of a breakthrough on a difficult project, subtly editing her out of the narrative. He was no longer the ambassador of her genius. He was claiming it as his own. He loved the empire Alara had built, but he was starting to resent that she was its queen. And in the shadow of the queen, a princess was waiting. Chloe, Alara's younger sister, had been a fixture in their lives since the beginning. After a series of failed jobs and half-hearted career attempts, Alara had offered her a position as her personal assistant. It was an act of sisterly love, an attempt to give Chloe stability. On the surface, Chloe was the perfect employee and the perfect sister. She was meticulously organized, fiercely protective of Alara's time, and always ready with a supportive word or a fresh cup of coffee. She would tell people, her eyes wide with admiration, "I don't know how she does it. She's a true artist." But her admiration was a carefully constructed mask for a lifetime of jealousy. Growing up, she had always been Alara's little sister. Her achievements were always measured against Alara's brilliance. She lived in a house designed by her sister, wore clothes bought with money earned by her sister, and worked a job given to her by her sister. She was drowning in a gratitude that felt more like a debt. She watched Julian, a man who also lived in Alara's light, and saw not a brother-in-law, but a kindred spirit. They were 2 people defined by another's greatness, and in their shared resentment, a dark and toxic alliance began to form. The quiet, ever-present antagonist in their family drama was Beatrice, Julian's mother. A woman of old money and even older prejudices, Beatrice had never fully approved of Alara. In her eyes, Alara was an upstart, a tradesman's daughter who had gotten lucky. She coded her insults in the saccharine sweetness of high society compliments. "That dress is lovely, dear," she might say to Alara. "It's amazing what you can do with simple fabrics." At family dinners, she would relentlessly praise Julian for the company's success. "I saw the feature in the Times. Darling," she'd announce, raising her wine glass to Julian. They went on and on about the firm's bold new direction. "That's my son," always looking to the future. She would conveniently ignore the fact that the bold new direction was a sustainable design philosophy Alara had spent years developing. Beatrice's praise was a poison, feeding Julian's ego while simultaneously diminishing Alara, reinforcing his growing belief that he was the rightful king of the empire, not just its consort. Their life, this beautiful, gilded cage, was on full display at their frequent parties. They would host lavish gatherings where the elite of the art, tech, and finance worlds mingled on terraces Alara had designed to frame the sunset perfectly. At these events, the roles were always the same. Julian was the magnanimous host, a glass of champagne always in hand, accepting compliments for his home, for his company's latest triumph. Alara would drift at the edges of the conversation, smiling politely, feeling more like a curator of a museum than the owner of a home. Chloe would be a blur of efficiency, directing caterers and greeting guests, but her eyes would constantly follow Julian, a shared glance here, a brief, conspiratorial smile there, moments so fleeting that no one, least of all Alara, would ever notice. It was a perfect illusion, a play with a flawless set and brilliant actors. The house was magnificent, the couple was enviable, the family was close. But the foundations of the Crestwood house were not made of steel and concrete. They were made of secrets and lies, and the first hairline cracks were beginning to show. The first cracks in a foundation are rarely dramatic. They do not announce themselves with a shudder or a roar. They begin as fissures, fine as a human hair, spiderwebbing silently in the dark corners where no one ever thinks to look. So it was with Alara's world. The signs were there, small inconsistencies in the perfect facade of her life, but her mind, trained to see the whole structure, missed the microscopic fractures in its core. Her focus, her entire creative soul, was consumed by the Solstice Tower, a project that was to be the crowning achievement of her career. It was a breathtaking, eco-conscious skyscraper set to redefine the city's skyline, a legacy of glass and green energy that demanded every ounce of her attention. While Alara was building her monument to the future, her own present was being quietly dismantled. The change in Julian was the most palpable, yet the easiest to excuse. The late-night meetings became a near-constant fixture in their calendar. Before, he would return energized, full of stories about the clients he'd charmed or the deal he'd nudged forward. Now, he came home late, smelling faintly of a wine he didn't drink at home, and would offer only vague, tired summaries. It was just more of the same, he'd say, loosening his tie and avoiding her eyes. You know, the usual schmoozing. His phone, which had once been left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually in his pocket, screen down, or clutched in his hand. A password appeared on his laptop, something he'd never had before. When she asked, he'd smiled a little too quickly. Company policy, on. New security protocols. You should do it too. His affection, once a source of genuine warmth, began to feel like a performance. The kisses were brief and landed on her cheek more often than her lips. His compliments about her work sounded like lines read from a script, lacking the specific, insightful praise he used to give. Alara saw a man buckling under the immense pressure of the Solstice Tower project, and her heart went out to him. She saw his secrecy as a need for space, his emotional distance as exhaustion. She gave him the benefit of the doubt, because that is what you do for the person you have built a life with. Chloe's transformation was more subtle, and in many ways, more unsettling. She had always been a diligent assistant, but now, a new, sharp-edged confidence began to emerge. She started to anticipate Julian's needs in a way that was almost uncanny, speaking up for him in meetings, sometimes even finishing his sentences. During a tense budget discussion for the tower, one of the lead engineers questioned a significant allocation for marketing materials. Before Julian could formulate a response, Chloe interjected smoothly. That figure accounts for the new international media push Julian has been developing, she said, her voice clear and steady. It targets emerging markets in Asia, a strategy that projects a 40% increase in brand recognition. All eyes turned to her, surprised by her command of a subject far outside her purview. Alara looked at her sister, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Chloe simply smiled sweetly and added, "Julian was explaining his vision to me. I just think it's brilliant." Julian beamed, placing a hand briefly on Chloe's shoulder. "She's a quick study," he said, a statement that felt layered with unspoken meaning. Later, Alara would find Chloe in Julian's office, the two of them huddled closely over spreadsheets she hadn't seen, their conversation stopping abruptly the moment she entered the room. "Just getting Chloe up to speed on the quarterly projections," Julian explained, his tone casual. Alara saw a young woman eager to grow, to contribute more to the family business. She felt a surge of pride, mistaking ambition for loyalty. Beatrice, meanwhile, became the narrator of their silent coup. Her backhanded compliments to Alara ceased, replaced by an open and effusive admiration for her son's supposed business prowess. At their weekly family dinner, she dominated the conversation. "I was speaking with Margaret Vanderbilt," she announced, naming one of the city's most influential philanthropists. "She said Aura Designs has never been more aggressive, more vital. She said Julian is a true visionary." She turned to Alara, her smile thin and condescending. "It's so good that you have this tower to keep you busy with the creative side of things, dear. It allows Julian to handle the difficult decisions, the real nuts and bolts of running an empire. A man's mind is just better suited for that kind of pressure, don't you think?" Alara simply gripped her fork, the insult washing over her. To argue would be to stoop to Beatrice's level. She saw a bitter, old-fashioned woman stuck in a bygone era and chose to ignore the poison in her words. She failed to recognize that Beatrice wasn't just making conversation. She was testing the waters, seeding a narrative, and celebrating a victory that had not yet been officially won. Each of these moments was a single, discordant note in the grand symphony of Alara's life. Heard in isolation, they were easily dismissed. Julian was stressed. Chloe was growing. Beatrice was being Beatrice. The logic was sound, the excuses plausible. Alara was an architect of physical spaces. She believed in tangible evidence, in stress tests, and solid ground. The concept of a betrayal so profound, a conspiracy woven from the very threads of her love and trust, was an architectural impossibility in the world she had built. Her blind spot wasn't a lack of intelligence, but an excess of faith. And so, convinced that her family was rallying behind her and the company to allow her to focus on her masterpiece, she made the decision that would seal her fate. In a meeting with her senior staff, with Julian and Chloe by her side, she made a formal announcement. "To ensure the Solstice Tower gets the undivided attention it deserves," she began, her voice filled with sincere gratitude, "I am temporarily delegating the majority of my day-to-day management responsibilities. Julian will take the lead on all financial and client-facing operations, and Chloe will be assisting him, acting as his deputy." She looked at them, a proud, trusting smile on her face. Julian placed a hand on her arm, his expression a perfect blend of solemn duty and loving support. "We won't let you down," he said. And across his shoulder, Alara saw her sister, Chloe, meet Julian's eyes for a fraction of a second. In that fleeting glance was a flicker of something she couldn't name. It wasn't pride, it was triumph. But the moment passed, and Alara, the master architect, didn't see the crack. She saw only the solid, beautiful structure of the family she thought she had. The abyss opened on a Tuesday, the day of Julian's 40th birthday. The house was quiet, filled with the soft afternoon light that Alara had so carefully designed it to capture. She had sent her staff home early, wanting to prepare for the intimate surprise dinner she had planned herself. Julian was out, a supposed last-minute meeting with a contractor that she now knew was a lie. He had been so rushed leaving that morning that for the first time in over a year, he had left his laptop on the desk in his study, not just unlocked, but open. It was a small oversight, a tiny crack in his carefully managed secrecy, and it would be his undoing. Her plan had been simple: create a slideshow of their life together, a collection of memories to mark the milestone. She just needed one specific photo from their first trip to Italy, a picture she was sure was saved on his hard drive. Sitting in his leather chair, a chair she had picked out for him, she felt a pang of nostalgic love. She was excited for the evening, for the look on his face when he saw the effort she'd made. The search for the photo was brief. It wasn't in any of the obvious folders. But then she saw it, a directory named Admin, a bland, corporate-sounding name that seemed out of place among folders labeled Vacations and Family. A flicker of instinct, the same instinct that told her when a support beam was misaligned or a design was unbalanced, made her click. The folder contained only 2 subfolders. The first was labeled with a single, chilling name, Chloe. Her heart gave a painful lurch. Why would Julian have a private folder for her sister? She opened it. The screen filled with images and videos that stole the breath from her lungs. It wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was a chronicle of their contempt for her. There were photos of Chloe wearing Alara's jewelry, posing mockingly in her private studio. There was a picture of them together in the master bedroom. On Alara's side of the bed, dated from a night she was in New York, accepting an award for the firm. Then came the emails, a river of poison that flowed back for nearly 2 years. They had nicknames for her: the Warden, the Ice Queen, the ATM. Julian's words were the cruelest. The Ice Queen is so obsessed with her concrete box, she'd never notice if the house burned down around her, one email read. Chloe's reply: let it burn. I can't wait to redecorate her office. It has the best light. Every word was a razor blade, methodically slicing away at the foundation of her reality. She was not just a wronged wife. She was a joke, a means to an end, the unwitting benefactor of her own elaborate humiliation. A wave of nausea washed over her, so intense she had to grip the sides of the desk to steady herself. She felt a primal urge to scream, to smash the laptop, to let the rage and pain explode out of her. But a terrifying, cold curiosity held her in place. There was still that second folder. Its name was Project Phoenix. Her finger, trembling slightly, moved the cursor and clicked. The screen changed, and the personal, emotional betrayal was suddenly dwarfed by the sheer, calculated malice of a corporate coup. This was not the work of two lovers caught in a moment of passion. This was the work of two predators. There were legal documents drafted by a law firm she'd never heard of, outlining a strategy to invoke a mental health clause in their corporate partnership agreement. They had been documenting her late nights at the studio and her intense focus on the Solstice Tower, twisting her dedication into a narrative of obsession and instability. There were doctored reports from subordinates, coerced statements about her erratic behavior. There was a detailed plan to call an emergency board meeting while she was away on a site visit, present their manufactured evidence, and vote her out of her own company. The plan was meticulous, brilliant in its cruelty. It outlined the new corporate structure: Julian as CEO, and the majority shareholder? A newly formed holding company, registered offshore, with a single director listed: Chloe. They had been siphoning smaller client funds into this shell company for months, building a war chest with Ilara's own money. They had even prepared press releases. Ilara, a true genius, has decided to step back to focus on her health. We wish her a speedy recovery. They were not just planning to steal her company, they were planning to erase her, to paint her as a tragic figure who had simply broken under the pressure, leaving her heroic husband and loyal sister to pick up the pieces. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were floating above her own body, watching a stranger endure this. There was one last folder within Project Phoenix. It was titled Legacy. It contained only one file, a long chat history between Julian and Chloe. She scrolled to the most recent messages. Chloe, just back from the doctor. Everything is perfect. Our little boy is healthy and growing strong. Julian, of course he is. He's my son. He is the future of this company, the heir to everything we are building. He'll grow up in this house, running the empire his father secured for him. The legacy Beatrice always wanted. Legacy. The word echoed in the silent room. It was the word Ilara used to describe the Solstice Tower, the mark she hoped to leave on the world. They had stolen it. They had stolen her love, her trust, her company, and now they had even stolen her future, planning to raise the child of their betrayal on the ashes of her life. That was the moment the pain stopped. It didn't fade. It was instantly extinguished, replaced by something else entirely. It was the feeling of a circuit breaker flipping in a crisis. All the non-essential systems shut down. The grief, the shock, the love, the heartbreak. All that was left was a single, humming line of pure, cold power. There would be no tears. There would be no screaming matches. The woman who had sat down in this chair 10 minutes ago, the loving wife planning a surprise party, was gone forever. Another woman stood up. A strategist, an architect, not of buildings, but of consequences. She calmly closed the laptop, her hands perfectly steady. She walked out of the study and looked at her beautiful, perfect house, seeing it now not as a home, but as a chessboard. The surprise dinner was still on. But the guest of honor would not be Julian. It would be Justice. The sound of the key in the front door was a trigger. It was a sharp, metallic click that sliced through the heavy silence of the house and jolted Ilara from her trance. In the space of a single, indrawn breath, she composed herself. The architect, the strategist, took control, pushing the shattered woman into a hidden, soundproof room deep within her soul. She smoothed her dress, arranged her lips into a soft, welcoming smile, and when Julian walked in, looking tired and self-important, she was the image of the loving wife he expected to see. The mask of serenity was in place. It was flawless. "Surprise," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of warmth. "Happy birthday, darling." Julian's face lit up with a practiced delight. "You shouldn't have," he said, wrapping his arms around her. The embrace was a cage, and she had to fight the instinct to flinch away from his touch. She could feel the lie in the pressure of his hands, smell the faint, foreign perfume on his collar. "I thought we agreed to keep it simple this year." "I wanted it to be special," she replied, her own words tasting like ash in her mouth. She was an actor in a play she had just discovered was a tragedy, and her co-stars were also her executioners. The dinner was an exquisite torture. She had prepared his favorite meal, pan-seared scallops, followed by a rack of lamb. She watched him eat the food she had made, listened to him praise her cooking, and felt absolutely nothing. A short while later, the doorbell rang. It was Chloe, of course, holding a perfectly wrapped gift and wearing an expression of bubbly excitement. "I just had to drop by and wish my favorite brother-in-law a happy birthday," she chirped, kissing Julian on the cheek, her hand lingering on his arm for a fraction of a second too long. Alara watched them, no longer a wife or a sister, but a scientist observing two specimens under a microscope. She saw everything now with a terrifying clarity. She saw the way their eyes met over the rim of their wine glasses, a shared, secret spark of triumph passing between them. She saw Julian subtly shift his chair closer to Chloe's. She heard the coded language in their conversation, the inside jokes that were not meant for her. They spoke about a recent business trip, and Chloe said, Julian was a lifesaver. The clients were being so difficult, but he handled it perfectly. Ilara knew she was the one who had stayed up all night preparing the documents that had saved that deal, while Julian and Chloe were otherwise occupied. The past was no longer a collection of memories. It was a crime scene, and she was finally seeing all the clues she had missed. She raised her glass for a toast. "To Julian," she said, her gaze steady as she looked him directly in the eye. 40 is a significant milestone. It's a time for reflection, for acknowledging everything you've worked so hard for. She then turned her smile to Chloe, and to family, to having people you can always count on. They both smiled back, completely oblivious to the venom laced in her words. They heard a tribute. She had delivered a declaration of war. "May you both," she finished, her voice as smooth as silk, "get everything you truly deserve." The most surreal moment came when she gave him his gift. It was a vintage 1965 Omega Speedmaster, a watch he had admired for years. It was a thoughtful, deeply personal gift, purchased by a woman who no longer existed. He was ecstatic. "Ilara, it's too much," he stammered, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine awe. As he clasped it around his wrist, she watched him, her mind cold and analytical. The watch was an investment, a symbol of a life they had supposedly built together. Now, it was just another asset, another item on a list that would eventually be reclaimed. After Chloe left, and Julian had gone upstairs, feigning exhaustion, Alara's performance ended. The mask did not fall. She simply put it away. There was no emotional collapse, no storm of tears. Her grief had been flash-frozen, transformed into a diamond-hard resolve. Sleep was an impossible luxury. While the man who had betrayed her slept in her bed, she returned to his study. The laptop was still there, a sleeping serpent. With the precision of a surgeon, she connected an external hard drive, one she kept for her most sensitive architectural files. A drive no one else knew existed. For the next 5 hours, as the moon traced its path across the sky, she meticulously copied everything. Every email, every photo, every video. Every line of legal jargon in Project Phoenix, every financial spreadsheet, every single word of their chat about their unborn son. She created multiple backups, encrypting each one with a complex password derived from the structural engineering equations of the Solstice Tower. They wanted to steal her legacy, so she would use the very language of its creation to bury them. This was her ammunition. A digital arsenal of their treachery. An emotional outburst would have been their victory, confirming their narrative of her instability. This cold, methodical preservation of evidence was her first act of rebellion. It was the quiet, calculated response they would never anticipate. As the first pale hint of dawn began to soften the edges of the night sky, she put the hard drive in a secure safe, behind a false panel in her studio, a secret compartment of her own design. Then, she picked up her phone. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. The time for comfort and sympathy was over. She scrolled through her contacts to a name she hadn't needed in years, a man she'd met through a former mentor, a corporate litigator, known less as a lawyer and more as a shark. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly discreet. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and awake even at this hour. "Thorne." "Marcus?" Alara said, her own voice steady, devoid of any emotion. "It's Alara Quinn." There was a brief pause. "Ilara, it's been a while. I trust you're not calling at 5 in the morning to discuss architecture." "No," she said, looking out the window at the slowly awakening city. "I have a problem that requires your specific expertise. I'm dealing with a hostile takeover situation." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "And it's personal." The meeting took place in a location stripped of all personality, a glass-walled conference room on the 54th floor of a downtown skyscraper that housed the offices of Thorne and Associates. The room was anonymous by design, a sterile, neutral ground for the kind of high-stakes corporate warfare that Marcus Thorne specialized in. The view was of a sprawling, indifferent city, a fitting backdrop for the cold deconstruction of a life. Ilara sat at the head of the polished black table, not as a victim, but as a CEO presenting a critical business case. Across from her sat her newly assembled war council. Marcus Thorne was exactly as she remembered him. Lean, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had a reputation for being a legal predator, a man who didn't just win cases, but annihilated his opponents. He listened with a predatory stillness, his only movement the occasional steeple of his long fingers. Beside him was the woman he had recommended, Anya Sharma, a forensic accountant who was his opposite in every way. Where Marcus was sharp edges and cynical wit, Anya was quiet intensity. She had a calm, almost serene demeanor, and she looked at the spreadsheets Alara projected onto the wall with the focused passion of an artist studying a masterpiece. Alara had brought the encrypted hard drive. With a steady hand, she connected it to the room's system and began her presentation. There was no quaver in her voice, no hint of the personal agony behind the data. She walked them through the affair with the detached precision of a homicide detective presenting evidence. She showed them the emails, the photos, highlighting the dates and times that corresponded with her own business trips. Then, she opened the Project Phoenix folder. "This is the core of their strategy," she said, her tone level and cool. She detailed the plot to oust her, the manufactured evidence of her instability, and the structure of the shell corporation, Phoenix Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware and directed by Chloe. Marcus leaned forward, a grim, appreciative smile touching his lips. "This isn't a messy divorce, Alara," he said, his voice a low hum of satisfaction. "This is grand larceny with a PowerPoint presentation. They're arrogant, they're sloppy, and they've documented their own conspiracy in meticulous detail. It's the most beautiful suicide note I've ever seen." Anya Sharma remained silent, her eyes darting across the financial projections Julian had created. She finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying an immense weight of authority. "He's been bleeding the company for at least 18 months, she stated, pointing to a series of escalating consulting fees and discretionary marketing expenses. "The amounts are small enough to fly under a standard audit, but the pattern is clear. He's not a sophisticated thief. He's just a greedy man who thinks no one is watching. The money trail from these expenses to Phoenix Holdings will be a highway, not a hidden path. Give me a week." The strategy session that followed was ruthless and efficient. Marcus paced the room, outlining the legal framework. "We do not confront them," he commanded, his voice sharp. "Not yet. An emotional confrontation is what they want. It feeds their narrative about you being unstable. We let them think they are winning. We give them more rope. Let them walk further into the trap they've built for themselves." He explained the legal angles: breach of fiduciary duty, corporate fraud, conspiracy, and possibly even wire fraud. "By the time we're done," he said with chilling certainty, "they won't be able to get a credit card, let alone run a company." The plan was two-pronged. The first phase was defense. "While Anya follows the money, we build a fortress around you," Marcus instructed. "We need to protect your personal assets, everything that isn't tied up in Aura Designs or your marital estate." He explained the process of creating an irrevocable trust, a legal entity so secure it would be untouchable in any future legal battle. The second phase was offense, and this is where Alara's unique knowledge became their most powerful weapon. Marcus would ask a legal question, and Alara would provide the corporate context. They mentioned leveraging the intellectual property of the firm's new software, Marcus noted, pointing to a line in their plan. Alara leaned in. "That software," she said, "was developed based on an algorithm I created during my master's thesis. It was licensed to the company, not owned by it. The license is in my name, personally. Without me, the software is a useless black box." Marcus's smile widened. "Exquisite," he whispered. Anya would point to a financial anomaly, and Alara would provide the story behind it. "There's a recurring overpayment to one of our primary steel suppliers, Titan Construction," Anya said, highlighting a row of figures. Alara nodded. "Titan's CEO is Julian's old college roommate. Julian insisted we use them for the Solstice Tower, even though their bid was higher. He claimed it was about relationships. It was about kickbacks. She wasn't just a client providing information. She was the chief architect of their counterattack. She knew the structural weaknesses of the company because she had designed the whole building. She knew every contract, every partnership, every line of code. They thought they were stealing her house, not realizing she had the master blueprints and knew exactly which walls to tear down to make the whole thing collapse on top of them. Leaving the meeting, Alara felt a strange sense of calm. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in her chest, but it was no longer her focus. It was fuel. For the next 2 weeks, she lived a life of disciplined duality. By day, she was the brilliant, focused leader of Aura Designs, pushing forward on the Solstice Tower, and the serene, unsuspecting wife at home. She played her part so perfectly that Julian and Chloe became even bolder, more confident that their plan was working flawlessly. But by night, her studio was no longer a place of creation. It was a war room. Guided by Marcus and Anya, she plunged into a world of legal documents and financial forensics. She spent hours reviewing bank statements, corporate bylaws, and investment portfolios. With the same precision she used to design a complex structure, she began the careful process of deconstructing her life and moving the essential pieces to safety. She executed the documents for the irrevocable trust, creating a financial fortress that would protect her future. The sword was being forged, not in fire and fury, but in the cold, quiet hours of the night, tempered by the ice in her veins. She thought of the name of their project, Phoenix. They imagined they would rise from the ashes of her career. The irony was poetic. A phoenix is a creature of myth, and she was the architect of reality. She was not planning to create ashes. She was planning to dismantle their entire world, piece by piece, leaving them with absolutely nothing to burn. The architect's primary tool is control. It is the art of imposing a deliberate order upon chaos, of understanding that every beam, every joint, every pane of glass must serve a singular, unified vision. For weeks, Alara had been on the defensive, gathering intelligence and reinforcing her foundations. Now, it was time to build, but she would not be building a tower of steel and glass. She would be constructing a trap, and her betrayers would be the willing, even eager, architects of their own demise. She was no longer a victim reacting to a conspiracy. She had become the puppet master. The first move was made on a Monday morning, in the sun-drenched breakfast nook of the Crestwood house. It was a scene of perfect domesticity. Alara was sipping her tea, Julian was scrolling through financial news on his tablet, and Chloe was there, as she often was now, to help Alara organize her day. Alara let out a theatrical sigh, one she had practiced to sound perfectly authentic, a blend of exhaustion and melancholy. Julian and Chloe both looked up, their concern a well-rehearsed performance. "What is it on?" Julian asked, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I was just thinking," Alara said, her eyes distant, as if staring at a problem far away. "The 10-year anniversary of Aura Designs is next month. We've been so buried in the Solstice Tower, we haven't even thought about it. We should do something grand." A flicker of interest appeared in Julian's eyes. He loved grand. "A party?" he offered. "More than a party," Alara said, slowly reeling him in. "A gala, for our clients, our investors, the media. A night to celebrate a decade of success, and to officially unveil the final renderings for the tower. A real statement." Chloe's eyes lit up. She could already picture the dresses, the photographers, the social media buzz. "Alara, that's a brilliant idea," she gushed. Then Alara set the hook. She slumped back in her chair, pressing her fingers to her temples. "But I honestly don't think I have the energy to plan it. The tower is taking everything I have. I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is." She looked at them, her expression a carefully crafted mask of vulnerability. "Julian, you have the vision for these things. You know how to make an impression. And Chloe, you're a marvel of organization. I was thinking, perhaps you two could take the lead? Make it your project. I trust you completely." It was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. In a single move, she had appealed to Julian's ego, Chloe's ambition, and their shared belief in her growing incompetence. She was not just giving them permission, she was giving them a mandate, handing them the keys to the company's treasury and its reputation. They saw it as their coronation, the first public demonstration of their impending leadership. They didn't see it for what it was. The stage she was building for their execution. Their acceptance was immediate and enthusiastic. Within days, the gala became their singular focus. Julian, liberated from Alara's fiscally conservative oversight, began spending with a reckless abandon that was breathtaking to behold. He presented the gala budget in a formal meeting. It was a work of pure fiction, wildly inflated with costs for champagne fountains, a celebrity chef flown in from France, and a small orchestra. Anya, who had secretly reviewed the document for Alara the night before, had confirmed that nearly a third of the budget was padded with vendor fees that would be funneled directly to Phoenix Holdings. In the meeting, Alara looked over the numbers, her brow furrowed in apparent concern. The old Alara would have dissected the budget line by line. The new Alara simply sighed. "It's more than I expected, Julian. A lot more." He began to argue, to justify the costs, but she held up a hand. "No," she said, sounding weary. "You're right. We only get one 10-year anniversary. If you believe this is what it takes to make the right impression, then I trust your judgment. Let's make it a night to remember." The look of smug triumph he exchanged with Chloe was so potent, Alara could almost feel it. Chloe, for her part, transformed. Given a taste of real power, she became a petty tyrant. She took the title of gala director, ordering custom stationery with her name on it. She treated junior staff with a new dismissive arrogance and bullied vendors into meeting her increasingly extravagant demands. She was so consumed with seating charts and floral arrangements that she stopped paying attention to the larger workings of the company, exactly as Alara had planned. She was busy planning a party, unaware that she was also arranging the final, public scene of her own downfall. To complete the illusion, Alara allowed herself to decline. She began to play the part they had written for her in their Project Phoenix narrative. In meetings, she would seem distracted, asking questions that had already been answered. Once, during a critical review of the tower's HVAC system with the lead engineers, she pretended to confuse the specifications for the ventilation and coolant systems, a rookie mistake she hadn't made since her first year of university. The silence in the room was awkward and heavy until Julian stepped in, smoothly correcting her by reading directly from her own briefing notes. "Don't worry, everyone," he said, patting Alara's shoulder condescendingly. "Alara's been under a lot of strain. I've got this." She saw the knowing glances exchanged between some of the board members present. The seeds of her instability were sprouting, watered by her own hand. Every night, she would provide a concise, encrypted report to Marcus and Anya. Gala budget approved. Documented overage is now at 32%. Anya, please track payments to Epicurean events. I suspect it's a new shell. To Marcus, 3 board members have now expressed concern for my well-being to Julian directly. The narrative is holding. Her apparent weakness was a carefully deployed weapon. Her retreat was, in fact, a strategic advance. The invitations were the final touch. They were printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf lettering, costing a small fortune. At the bottom, in elegant script, it read, "Hosted by Julian Quinn and Chloe Vance." Her own name was present only in the company title at the top. Chloe had left a copy on her desk, a passive-aggressive trophy of their victory. Alara picked it up, feeling the weight of the expensive paper. She ran her finger over their names. They were so proud of their creation, so confident in their ascent. She smiled, a true, cold smile that no one else could see. An architect knows that a skyline is defined as much by the empty spaces between the buildings as by the structures themselves. Before you can build something new and beautiful, you must first clear the site. This invitation wasn't for a party. It was a notice of demolition. And the entire city was being invited to watch. Every grand design requires a centerpiece, a focal point that draws the eye and defines the space. Alara's plan for retribution was no different. The anniversary gala was the stage, but she needed a spectacular, undeniable main event, a definitive act of self-destruction, so clear and so public that it would leave no room for doubt or interpretation. She needed to hand Julian a poisoned chalice, one so beautiful and alluring that he would drink from it willingly, even gratefully. She found it in a portfolio of unsolicited development proposals, a project so flawed and so seductive it was perfect. It was called the Elysian Art Hotel. On paper, the Elysian was a masterpiece of ambition, a boutique hotel in a rapidly gentrifying arts district, designed in collaboration with a flamboyant, headline-grabbing European artist. It promised to be an architectural landmark, a fusion of high art and luxury hospitality. The projected returns were astronomical, and the media buzz was already palpable. Any other firm would have jumped at the chance. But Alara, with her architect's eye for structural integrity, saw the fatal flaws hidden beneath the glossy renderings. The developer had a notorious reputation for cutting corners. The site itself was a logistical nightmare, plagued by ambiguous soil reports and a pending zoning variance that was far from guaranteed. The construction estimates were wildly optimistic, failing to account for the intricate engineering the design would require. The Elysian was not a building. It was a beautifully designed mirage, a financial black hole waiting to swallow millions. It was the perfect gift for a man blinded by ego. She chose her moment carefully, a formal quarterly review with the senior board members. It was the first time she had presented a new development opportunity in months. She began by masterfully selling the dream of the Elysian, her voice filled with a feigned, almost wistful enthusiasm. She walked them through the stunning designs, the celebrity partnerships, the incredible press it would generate. It would redefine the Aura brand for the next decade, she concluded, letting the excitement build in the room. Then, she began to sow the seeds of her own doubt. She pulled up the risk assessment reports. "Of course," she said, her tone shifting to one of weary caution. "It is aggressive," she pointed to the screen. "The capital investment is significant, especially with our resources already committed to the Solstice Tower. The soil hydrology reports are inconclusive." She sighed, looking around the table at the captivated faces. "Honestly, I'm not sure I have the appetite for another high-risk project right now. Perhaps it's too bold. Perhaps we should stick to what we know." She had thrown down the gauntlet, challenging Julian's entire persona in front of the board. He had been positioning himself as the bold visionary, the risk-taker, while painting her as the cautious, burnt-out creative. He took the bait so predictably it was almost disappointing. Timid? Alara, this isn't the time to be timid, he boomed, standing up for dramatic effect. This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking project that will set us apart. Risk is part of the game. You can't build an empire by being afraid to spend money. He was performing, his voice resonating with a passion he believed was his own. He looked at the board members, seeking their affirmation. The Solstice Tower is your legacy, Alara, and it's magnificent. Let the Elysian be mine. The board was convinced. They saw a dynamic leader seizing an opportunity and a tired founder gracefully passing the torch. Now, for the final, closing move of the trap. Alara held up her hand, a look of thoughtful resignation on her face. You're right, Julian. Your passion for this is undeniable. She paused, as if making a difficult decision. But if this is to be your project, your legacy, then it must be entirely yours. I don't want to hold you back with my caution. She looked the chairman in the eye. I propose that the board authorize the Elysian project with one condition, that Julian is given sole and exclusive signing authority and operational command. All successes and all failures will rest entirely with him. I will not be a bottleneck. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. It was the public anointing he had craved for years. The board, seeing it as a logical delegation of duties, voted unanimously to approve the motion. Marcus Thorne had drafted the legal addendums that morning. As Julian signed the documents with a flourish, a triumphant smile on his face, Alara felt the cold, satisfying click of a cage door swinging shut. With the legal authority secured, Julian plunged headfirst into the Elysian, pouring company resources into it with the fervor of a true believer. To ensure he wouldn't pull back at the last minute, Alara added one final, masterful deception. She arranged to have lunch with an old university friend, now a well-respected financial journalist, at a restaurant she knew Julian frequented with potential investors. As Julian sat a few tables away, she spoke to her friend in a conspiratorially loud whisper about a verified inside rumor she'd heard. The tech giant Omnicorp was secretly planning to build its new global headquarters just 2 blocks from the Elysian site, a move that would make property values skyrocket. It was a complete fabrication, but as she had predicted, Julian overheard every word. The next day, citing confidential market intelligence, he successfully argued to the board to double the company's investment in the Elysian, accelerating the timeline and bypassing several crucial due diligence steps to get ahead of the Omnicorp announcement. He was now all in, betting the company's financial stability on a lie she had fed him. Throughout this time, Alara continued her performance, sending him carefully worded emails that Marcus Thorne had vetted. Julian, are you sure about waiving the second soil analysis? It seems risky. Just flagging the new cost estimate from the developer. It's 20% higher than their initial bid. Each email was a paper trail, a breadcrumb leading directly to his recklessness and his dismissive, one-line replies. Under control, don't worry about it. This is my project, were his signed confessions. The call came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks before the gala. It was the head of construction for the Elysian project. His voice was frantic. The city had issued a permanent and final denial of the zoning variance, citing unresolvable geological instability at the site. Simultaneously, the developer had declared bankruptcy, absconding with their massive upfront payment. The Elysian Art Hotel was officially dead. It was a catastrophic, 8-figure loss, a wound so deep it threatened the company's solvency. Alara took the call in her studio. She listened to the panicked explanation, her expression unreadable. I see, she said calmly when he had finished. Thank you for the update. I will inform the board. She hung up the phone and looked out the window at the setting sun. The poisoned chalice had been drained to the last drop. The main event was over. All that was left was the public unveiling of the body. The final week before the gala was a study in controlled chaos and spiraling desperation. The news of the Elysian project's collapse had been successfully contained. For now, Julian, with the frantic energy of a man trying to plug a rupturing dam with his bare hands, had worked tirelessly to bury the truth. He held secret, panicked meetings, bullied the firm's accountants into creative bookkeeping, and leveraged every favor he had to secure a short-term line of credit to mask the catastrophic loss. He was living on a knife's edge, and the pressure was making him volatile. The gala was no longer just a celebration or a power play. It had become his life raft, the one spectacular event that he believed could distract from the financial abyss opening up beneath their feet. His arrogance, now curdled by fear, directed itself at Alara. He stormed into her studio one evening, his face flushed, waving a stack of preliminary loss reports. "This is your fault," he snarled, throwing the papers onto her desk. "If you hadn't checked out, if you hadn't buried yourself in this damn tower and left me to handle everything alone, this wouldn't have happened." Alara slowly looked up from the blueprint she was reviewing, her eyes cold and clear. "My memory must be failing me," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I seem to recall you standing in front of the entire board, demanding sole authority. You called the Elysian your legacy, Julian. It appears you were right." He stood there, speechless, his rage deflating into sputtering impotence. He had expected tears, arguments, a fight. He was not prepared for the unshakable, indifferent wall of her composure. He turned and slammed the door, leaving her in the silence he could no longer tolerate. He and Chloe clung to each other, their whispered conversations now laced with a frantic edge, reassuring themselves that once the gala was over, once their leadership was cemented in the public eye, they could fix the Elysian mess. While they were flailing, Alara was steeling herself. The plan was in motion, the pieces moving toward their final positions on the board, and she found herself in the unnerving calm at the center of the storm. But in that quiet, a ghost of the woman she used to be sometimes emerged. One night, while sorting through old files, she found it, the cocktail napkin from her first date with Julian. On it, sketched in fading ink, was her first rough drawing of the Crestwood house. It was a drawing full of hope, of a shared future, of a love she had believed was as solid as the foundations she designed. A profound, aching grief washed over her, a pain so sharp it felt physical. She wasn't just mourning a marriage, she was mourning her own innocence, the optimistic, trusting woman who had drawn that sketch. For a fleeting moment, the weight of what she was about to do felt immense. The act of destroying two lives, no matter how deserved, felt monstrous. Was this justice, or was it just a more elegant form of destruction? Her eyes drifted to the adjacent screen on her desk, where a single file was open. It was a chat log from the encrypted drive. "Chloe to Julian. Are you sure the Ice Queen won't get suspicious about the revised gala budget?" Julian's reply. "She's too busy playing with her models to notice. She trusts us." That's the beautiful, pathetic thing about her. Pathetic. The word cut through the fog of her grief, like a shard of ice. The memory of her pain vanished, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of her purpose. They hadn't just betrayed her, they had disdained her, mocked the very love and trust that they had exploited. She closed the file. The ghost of the old Alara retreated. The soldier remained. Her final meeting with Marcus and Anya was brief and surgically precise. They met in the back of a quiet, dark-paneled library. There were no wasted words. Anya slid a slim tablet across the table. "The financial presentation is ready," she said. "It's a 10-minute summary. It outlines the embezzlement, the shell companies, and it culminates with the total projected losses from the Elysian project. It is devastating." Marcus placed a leather-bound folder next to it. The official notices of termination for Julian and Chloe, a lawsuit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, and a restraining order preventing them from accessing company property or funds. "My process servers will be dressed as guests. They will be waiting outside the main ballroom. Once you begin your speech, I will give them the signal. The moment you are finished, Julian and Chloe will be served. From that second on, they are powerless." He looked at her, his expression serious. "There is no turning back from this, Alara. I passed the point of no return the day I opened that folder," she replied, her voice unwavering. The day of the gala arrived. The Crestwood house was a symphony of controlled chaos. Florists were erecting enormous displays of white orchids, caterers swarmed the kitchen, and a string quartet practiced in the grand entryway. Chloe was at the center of it all, a whirlwind of self-importance, snapping orders into a headset, flushed with stress and authority. Julian was playing the part of the gracious host, already dressed in a tuxedo, greeting the event staff with a broad, false smile. But the panic was visible in the tightness around his eyes. Ilara moved through the preparations silently, an observer in her own home. She felt strangely detached, as if watching a film of someone else's life. An hour before the guests were due to arrive, she went to her dressing room. The silence was a welcome relief. She laid out the dress she had chosen. It was not a celebratory gown. It was armor. A floor-length sheath of deep crimson silk, elegant, severe, and unforgettable. As she fastened the clasp of a simple diamond necklace, Chloe burst into the room without knocking, frantic. "The ice sculpture is melting unevenly. It looks lopsided. You have to come see it." Ilara turned from the mirror and looked at her sister. She looked at this woman who had shared her childhood and then conspired to steal her future, now consumed with the aesthetics of frozen water. The sheer pathetic absurdity of it all was overwhelming. "I'm sure you'll handle it, Chloe," Ilara said, her voice calm. "You're the director, after all." Chloe, momentarily stunned by the dismissal, hesitated and then rushed out. Left alone once more, Ilara faced her reflection. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. Her eyes were older, harder. The soft vulnerability was gone, replaced by an unyielding resolve. She was not a wife preparing for a party. She was not a sister. She was the founder and CEO of Aura Designs. She was the architect of what was to come. She took one last, deep breath. The countdown was over. It was time to begin. The gala was a spectacle of calculated perfection, the physical manifestation of the lie they had all been living. Hundreds of guests, a curated collection of the city's most powerful and influential, mingled in the grand ballroom of the Crestwood House. The air, thick with the scent of white orchids and expensive perfume, hummed with the sound of clinking champagne glasses and discreet, important conversations. An orchestra played softly from a balcony, its melody, a tasteful soundtrack to success. It was everything Julian had envisioned, a monument to his own perceived brilliance, funded by the woman he was about to discard. He was in his element, a king holding court in a castle he had not built. He moved through the crowd with an easy, confident grace, a hand on a shoulder here, a shared laugh there. He accepted congratulations on the beauty of the house, on the ambition of the Solstice Tower, on the firm's 10th anniversary. He absorbed the praise like a dry sponge, his recent, secret panic over the Elysian disaster receding with every compliment. He felt invincible, convinced that this public display of power and prosperity would make the financial hole he dug simply disappear. Chloe was his radiant queen. Dressed in a glittering silver gown, she was no longer the mousy assistant, but a dazzling hostess, the future face of the brand. She glided from group to group, her laughter a little too loud, her smile a little too bright. She was drunk on the attention, on the feeling of having finally arrived. She would catch Julian's eye across the room, and they would share a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. Their plan had worked. The world was theirs. Ilara, in her crimson armor, moved through the party like a wraith. She was a vision of serene elegance, greeting guests with a quiet warmth that belied the glacial resolve in her heart. She was not a participant, she was a hunter, assessing the terrain, watching her targets. She saw Beatrice holding court, loudly telling anyone who would listen how her son's business acumen had transformed the company. She saw board members patting Julian on the back. She saw it all, and she filed it all away. To everyone there, she was the quiet, creative genius, the supportive wife about to be gently pushed aside. No one saw the architect of the evening's meticulously planned demolition. At precisely 9 o'clock, the music softened, and Julian strode onto the custom-built stage, bathed in a warm, flattering spotlight. He tapped the microphone, and a confident, charming smile spread across his face. "Welcome," he began, his voice smooth and resonant. 10 years ago, Aura Designs was born from a creative spark. Tonight, we celebrate what it has become. a powerhouse, a leader, an engine of innovation. He spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a masterful narrative in which he was the central hero. He talked of navigating treacherous economic waters and making bold, decisive moves, a clear, if veiled, reference to the Elysian project, which he framed as a courageous venture, its outcome still pending. Then, he turned his attention to Alara, who stood near the front of the stage. He gestured to her, his expression softening into one of patronizing tenderness. "Of course," he said, "none of this would be possible without the foundational vision of my brilliant wife, Alara." A polite, warm applause rippled through the crowd. Her creative talent is the bedrock of this company. But empires are not just built on bedrock, they are maintained by tireless leadership and a constant push forward. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Which is why I am so grateful that she is now taking a much-deserved step back, to rest and to focus on her health, entrusting the future of this company to a new generation of leadership." He was delivering her professional eulogy, and the crowd was applauding it. He raised his glass. "To the future of Aura Designs." As the applause swelled, Julian turned, expecting Alara to smile back at him, to play her part as the graceful, retiring founder. Instead, she handed her champagne flute to a passing waiter and, without a word, began to walk towards the stage. A hush fell over the guests closest to her. The orchestra, confused, faltered in its melody. Julian and Chloe, who had joined him on stage, watched her approach, their smiles frozen on their faces, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. She ascended the small set of stairs, her movements unhurried and deliberate, and stood at the second microphone. She surveyed the room, her calm, steady gaze sweeping over the sea of expectant faces. The silence was now total, a heavy, electric blanket over the entire ballroom. She turned her head slightly and looked at Julian. "Thank you, Julian," she said, her voice clear and amplified, carrying to every corner of the room. That was a remarkable performance. A collective, sharp intake of breath was audible. The word performance, delivered with a subtle, icy emphasis, changed the entire atmosphere of the evening. It was no longer a celebration. It was a confrontation. Julian's smile tightened, the color draining from his face. Chloe's hand instinctively went to his arm. Alara turned back to the audience. "My husband is right about one thing," she continued, her voice resonating with a power no one in that room had ever heard from her before. "Tonight is about the future of Aura Designs. For a decade, we have built this company on a foundation of two things: architectural integrity and personal transparency. We design buildings that are honest, that have nothing to hide. I believe our business should be the same." She let that statement settle, her eyes finding those of key investors and board members in the crowd. "So tonight, in the spirit of that transparency, before we celebrate the future, I feel it is my duty to share the real story of our company's new direction. I want to tell you about the true cost of our bold new vision and introduce you to the two people who have been its chief architects." Her gaze fell upon Julian and Chloe, who were now standing stock still, paralyzed by a dawning, sickening horror. Her story was not over, but this chapter of theirs was. With a final, almost imperceptible nod towards the back of the room where Anya Sharma stood by the AV booth, Alara held the silence. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a beautiful looping video of the firm's greatest achievements, suddenly flickered. And then, it went completely, terrifyingly black. The reckoning had begun. The black screen held the room of 1,000 conversations in a single, suffocating silence. For 5 long seconds, the world stood still. Then, the screen flickered to life. It did not show a graph or a chart. It showed an email. The text was large, stark white against the black background, and Alara's voice, now devoid of any warmth, cut through the silence as she read the words aloud. "Julian to Chloe. Subject, the Ice Queen's schedule. Body, she's in New York until Thursday. The house is ours. Dated 6 months ago." A tidal wave of shock rippled through the ballroom. Gasps were audible. People turned to stare at each other, then at the frozen figures of Julian and Chloe on the stage. Before the whispers could build, the screen changed. Another email. "Chloe to Julian. Just a few more months of playing the devoted sister. I can't wait to redecorate her office. The screen then dissolved into a slideshow of images. Chloe wearing Alara's clothes, Julian and Chloe embracing on a balcony in a hotel Alara had designed. It was a swift, brutal, and undeniable confirmation of the affair. This was not about justice, this was about humiliation. "This is a lie," Julian finally roared, finding his voice. He lunged for Alara's microphone, his face a mask of purple rage. "She's hysterical, this is fabricated." Before he could reach it, two large men in crisp black suits, who had seemed like part of the stage decoration, stepped forward. One of them placed a firm, immovable hand on Julian's chest. Alara didn't even flinch. She simply paused, waited for him to be restrained, and then continued as if a gnat had been swatted away. "Fabricated?" she asked the crowd, her voice dangerously soft. "Let's talk about fabrication." The screen changed again, this time to a title slide, Project Phoenix, a hostile takeover strategy. The room fell silent once more. For the next 5 minutes, Alara walked the horrified audience through their own meticulous plan. She showed the board the documents outlining the plot to declare her mentally unstable. She showed them the forged employee reviews used as evidence. She showed them the proposed new corporate structure, with Julian as CEO and Chloe as the hidden majority shareholder of Phoenix Holdings LLC. "They were not just planning to take my place," Alara explained, her voice ringing with cold clarity. "They were planning to erase me, using my life's work as the narrative for my own supposed failure." End of chapter. The board members stared, their faces pale with fury. They were not just witnesses to a marital dispute, they were victims of a conspiracy that targeted them as well, and their reputations were now tied to the man being exposed as a fraud on stage. Then came Anya's masterpiece, the screen filled with a complex but clear flowchart. "Let's follow the money," Alara said. A glowing line appeared, originating from Aura Design's main account. It branched off, showing small, seemingly insignificant payments for consulting, marketing, and event planning. The line reconnected at a single box on the right side of the screen, the Phoenix Holdings Shell Company. Then, the screen showed the gala itself. The real vendor invoices appeared next to the wildly inflated ones Julian had submitted. The difference, a staggering sum, was tracked in real time, flowing directly into Chloe's account. "The very party you are attending tonight," Alara announced, "was designed to be the final act of theft from this company. They used your presence here as cover for their crime." The final act of the presentation was the Elysian Art Hotel. Alara displayed her own emails, the ones filled with warnings about soil reports and zoning laws, on one side of the screen. On the other, Julian's arrogant one-line dismissals appeared in stark contrast. And then, the final slide. It was a single number, glowing in a deep, bloody red against the black background. It was the total, catastrophic, 8-figure loss from the Elysian project, a number large enough to jeopardize the future of the entire company. "Leadership," Alara said, the silence in the room now absolute, "is about responsibility. This number is the legacy my husband chose to build." She let the image of that devastating number hang in the air, a final, damning testament to his greed and incompetence. She saw Beatrice, her face ashen, slump forward in her chair, a silent, dramatic collapse. She saw Chloe, no longer a triumphant queen but a broken doll, sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. She saw Julian, defeated, his rage replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. He was a king whose castle had just been revealed to be made of cardboard, and it was dissolving in the rain. Alara took a deep breath, her voice now filled with a strength that seemed to command the very air in the room. "A structure built on a rotten foundation cannot stand. An empire built on lies will collapse. For 10 years, Aura Designs has stood for integrity. That integrity was compromised." She looked out at the faces of her employees, her clients, her investors. "Tonight, we remove the rot, and tomorrow, we begin to rebuild." She gave one last, final nod. The house lights came up, harsh and unforgiving. The magical atmosphere of the gala was gone, replaced by the stark reality of a crime scene. At the grand entrance to the ballroom, two well-dressed men and a woman Marcus Thorne's process servers stepped forward. They moved with a quiet purpose through the stunned, parting crowd directly towards the stage. As Alara stepped back from the microphone, they ascended the stairs. The first server approached Julian. "Julian Quinn," he said, his voice professional and clear. "You have been served." He handed a thick legal envelope to Julian, whose hand took it with a numb, unthinking reflex. The second server approached a still sobbing Chloe. "Chloe Vance, you have been served." Her envelope fell from her trembling fingers onto the stage. The security team moved in. "Sir, ma'am, you'll need to come with us," one of them said quietly but firmly. They were not arrested, not yet. They were simply being removed. And so began their walk of shame. Escorted by security, holding the legal documents that signified the end of their lives as they knew them, Julian and Chloe descended the stage. They were forced to walk through the heart of the crowd, through the hundreds of colleagues, friends, and peers they had wanted so desperately to impress. No one spoke, no one moved to help them. The only sound was the clicking of a few guests secretly taking pictures with their phones, capturing the moment of their absolute and public ruin. They walked past their fainted mother, past the board members who stared at them with contempt, and out of the grand ballroom, stripped of their power, their dignity, and their future. The judgment was absolute. The sentence had been served. The gala did not end. It evaporated. The moment Julian and Chloe were escorted from the room, a stunned, tomb-like silence held for a moment before fracturing into 1,000 hushed, frantic conversations. The air of celebration was replaced by the electric buzz of scandal. Guests, avoiding Alara's eyes, as if she were the sun, began to slip away into the night, eager to be the first to spread the story of the spectacular implosion of the Quinn Empire. The party was over. The legend was just beginning. In the ensuing weeks, the legal and financial consequences were as swift and merciless as Marcus Thorne had promised. Faced with an avalanche of irrefutable, self-documented evidence, Julian and Chloe did not fight. There was no dramatic courtroom battle. There was only a quiet, humiliating surrender. To avoid criminal prosecution for fraud, they signed everything away. Their shares in the company, their claims to any marital assets, their rights to the Crestwood house. They were legally and surgically excised from Alara's life and her company, left with nothing but their infamy and a small, court-mandated settlement that was just enough to disappear with. Their society friends vanished. Their credit lines were cut. The gilded cage had been dismantled, leaving them exposed and powerless in a world that no longer had any use for them. Aura Designs, however, did not crumble. In the days following the gala, Alara moved with a purpose that left no room for doubt. She held an emergency meeting with the board, presenting a clear, strategic recovery plan. There were no apologies, only action. The company's name, now tainted by scandal, was officially changed. In a move of symbolic power, it was rebranded as Phoenix Rising by Alara. It was a declaration that she was the one who had risen from the ashes, stronger and with her integrity, not just intact, but forged in fire. Clients and investors who had been shocked by the revelation were now impressed by her strength and transparency. They didn't just stay. New ones, attracted by the story of her resilience, began to call. The Solstice Tower, her true legacy, continued its ascent into the sky, a silent, steel testament to her enduring vision. Months passed. The noise faded. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. Alara found peace not in the victory, but in the work. One afternoon, a single, handwritten letter arrived at her office. There was no return address, but she recognized Chloe's looping, overly ornate handwriting immediately. With a sense of weary curiosity, she opened it. The letter was a rambling, self-pitying mess, full of blame, excuses, and a desperate, pathetic attempt to rewrite history. Chloe wrote of Julian's manipulations, of her own insecurities, of the life she felt she was owed. It was the predictable monologue of a narcissist. But then, in the final paragraph, came the last, unexpected twist in a story Alara had thought was over. Chloe wrote, "I have nothing left now. No money, no future, and Julian can barely look at me. He lost everything for a legacy, for a son. Maybe it's cruel to tell you this, or maybe it's the one piece of truth I have left to give. He's not Julian's son, Ilara. He never was. I was pregnant before Julian, and I even started our affair. After a stupid, meaningless night with someone else, I was scared. I saw Julian's ambition, his desire for an heir, and I used it. I used that baby to secure my place, to push him to act. I gave him the one thing I knew you couldn't. And in the end, it was all built on one more lie. Ilara put the letter down on her desk. She had expected to feel a surge of vindictive triumph, a final, satisfying confirmation of their pathetic deceit. Instead, she felt a profound and hollow emptiness. All of it, the grand conspiracy, the destruction of her family, the immense pain, the calculated revenge, had all pivoted on a cheap, desperate lie. Julian had torched his entire world for a legacy that was never his, a fantasy spun by a woman just as broken and greedy as he was. The final act of their tragedy wasn't grand, it was just squalid. She stood and walked to the vast window of her new office, the one with the best light, and looked out at the city skyline. The revenge hadn't healed her. The act of reclaiming her life is what had saved her. She had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson. Justice is not about vengeance. It is about restoring balance. It is about taking back your power, not by destroying your enemies, but by refusing to be destroyed by them. The real victory wasn't the moment they were escorted out of her house. It was the quiet mornings now, when she could walk into the company she had built, her mind clear, and her future her own. It was then she finally understood the truth of the storm she had weathered. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. In that silence, they are not breaking. They are not accepting defeat. They are observing, they are learning, and they are meticulously, patiently, architecting the foundations of their own justice. Ilara's story is a reminder that the most powerful structures are not built of steel or glass, but of an unbreakable will. From the ashes of a devastating betrayal, she did not just rebuild, she rose. Thank you for listening. Join us next time for another story of the intricate dramas that unfold behind the closed doors of family and the extraordinary lengths people will go to for both love and revenge.